Hello and welcome to The Top Story, a podcast with the headlines of the day from our correspondents around the world. I'm Xi Zhi. Coming up in this edition, Chinese President Xi Jinping has called for enhancing China-Brazil ties as he arrives for the G20 summit and a state visit. The Biden administration has reportedly allowed Ukraine to use long-range missiles supplied by the US to strike Russia. And Lebanese authorities say Israel has intensified its attacks across the country, with its media relations chief killed in an Israeli strike. We begin with Chinese President Xi Jinping's attendance of the G20 summit in Brazil and his state visit to the country. The Chinese leader has said he looks forward to having an in-depth exchange with Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva to enhance relations. The president called for promoting the synergy of both countries' development strategies and discussing international and regional issues of common interest. President Xi highlighted the strong partnership between China and Brazil, noting their deep political trust and growing cultural exchanges under his and President Lula's leadership. He said both nations, as major developing countries, have worked together to amplify the voice of the global south and contribute to world peace and development. 2024 marks the 50th anniversary of diplomatic ties between the two countries. President Xi Jinping emphasized that bilateral relations are at a historic juncture. He expressed hopes to strengthen strategic alignment and cooperation, ushering in a new golden 50 years. President Xi also said he looks forward to the G20 summit as a chance to collaborate with global leaders to advance multipolarity, inclusive globalization, and the G20's role as a key platform for international economic cooperation. Paulo Cabral has more on the G20 summit.
Well, it's a very important meeting. We are here at the venue. That blue structure there with G20 written on it, that's where the leaders will be coming through to get to the venue of the summit itself, and much anticipation for the arrival of all the delegations. Some of them have already arrived, just like the Chinese and President Xi Jinping. Others still coming to Rio de Janeiro. And Brazil, as the president of the G20 this year, has actually established three main axes for discussion. That's what's going to happen here in the venue in Rio de Janeiro. The first one is social justice and the fight against inequality. Brazil has even launched a global alliance against hunger and against poverty. And another thing, as we're saying now, is the sustainable development and transition to clean energy is the second axis of discussion here. Another aspect, another issue where Brazil has a very strong action. And finally, the third axis proposed by Brazil is the discussion on the reform of global governance. While it's certainly very significant, there was much anticipation here in Brazil for the state visit of President Xi Jinping. As you know, China is Brazil's main commercial partner. Most of Brazilian exports, about 70% of Brazilian soy, for example, which is Brazil's main export product, now go to China, which is also the main buyer of Brazilian iron ore and several other mineral and agricultural commodities. So there is that, very important because of the commercial aspect, but then there is politics as well. Both Brazil and China are strong proponents of multilateralism and also of an alliance between the developing countries of what's being called now the global south. So there is much anticipation for this visit of Xi Jinping here in Brazil, again, for mainly these two reasons. For a more pragmatic point of view, trade with China is essential for Brazil, and Brazil wants to increase it. And if you take a broader approach in terms of world politics, Brazil and China tend to be allies in this idea of fostering relations and working together with the countries of the global south, the developing countries of the world.
That is Paulo Cabral reporting. Also in Brazil, for the first time in the G20's history, the African Union has taken a seat at this year's summit in Brazil as a full member. From achieving financial reforms to equitable energy transition, the African Union is expected to push international partners on pressing issues that need immediate attention. Robert Nagila reports.
Up until last year, South Africa was the only African country that was a permanent member of the G20, an economic bloc that comprised 19 countries and the European Union, boasting about 85% of global GDP and 75% of global trade. But at the 2023 G20 summit held in India, membership status was granted to the African Union, which represents 55 member states on the continent. Experts say this has given Africa a platform to bring global attention attention to its priorities, which have taken a back seat with international focus on the conflicts in Gaza and Ukraine.
You're looking at advocating for reform in international financial institutions, enhancing agricultural outputs, achieving a just energy transition, more trade and investment for the African continental free trade area, especially in the rollout.
There are also lingering questions as to whether the G20 will back the African Union's agenda, especially if interests are not aligned.
The problem here is that we're joining the table, but the menu has been set up already for us. We're not deciding, we're not imposing the African priorities. We have to, before going into the G20, define for ourselves what is our economic agenda.
And with 54 countries on the continent, each with its own interests, there are doubts as to whether the AU can adopt a common position for its members on local and global issues.
It's hard to build an agenda based on this kind of consensus when countries are unable to trust who represents them.
Previously, the African Union attended the G20 as an invited international organization. Experts point out that by granting full membership to the AU, the G20 is alive to a growing push for a realignment of the current global order by several countries.
The G20 dominates the world economy and is being gradually challenged by the global majority, which is the global south, with the leadership of BRICS. BRICS is increasingly inviting key players in the global south, especially African countries.
The AU's success at this year's summit then may be measured by what commitments to action on its agenda it will receive from the G20. And while there will be a lot of pressure on the AU, there's a feeling out there that the continent's inclusion into this prestigious club could not have come at a better time. Next year, South Africa hosts the G20 summit. Another core of its agenda is Africa's development.
That was Robert Nagila on the African Union's attendance at the G20 summit. Turning to Europe, a Reuters report says US President Joe Biden's administration has allowed Ukraine to use long-range missiles supplied by the US to strike Russia. If confirmed, the move is a major change to Washington's policy in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. It comes 2 months before President-elect Donald Trump takes office on January the 20th. The White House and the U.S. State Department have declined to comment. Meanwhile, Ukraine has announced nationwide power restrictions on Monday after a major Russian attack damaged Ukraine's energy infrastructure. Megumi Lim reports from Kyiv.
Well, officials here are saying that this was one of the largest missile attacks where regions all across Ukraine came under attack. The last mass missile attack took place about 2 months ago on August 26th, where over 200 drones and missiles were launched by Russia against Ukraine. But in this latest overnight attack, according to Ukraine's Air Force, the air defense systems shot down 104 out of 120 missiles and 42 out of 90 drones launched by Russia. And the Air Force said that Russia deployed over 40 fighter jets of various types carrying missiles and also 4 naval missile carriers that took part in the launch of these projectiles. Now, the numbers alone tell you how large scale these attacks were. And I can tell you that it was also a very loud, sleepless night for many people here in the capital. We were woken up by air raid sirens and also multiple powerful, loud explosions that rang out across the city throughout the night as air defense systems worked to intercept these projectiles. And officials have said that the energy system of the country has been severely damaged. The energy minister said Moscow targeted the country's power generation and transmission facilities throughout Ukraine. Now, these attacks were expected. People have been expecting these attacks, that we have been experiencing regular drone attacks over the past couple of weeks. So there has been this sense of foreboding that a bigger attack was on its way. And it looks like as temperatures have dropped here, the winter season has settled in. Russia has begun its winter attacks on the country's energy grid. Already half of Ukraine's power generating capacity has been crippled by attacks that were carried out during the summer. And energy officials here are saying that we can expect blackouts of up to 20 hours a day if these attacks do continue. And so we are expecting a very difficult winter ahead here.
That is Megumi Lim reporting from Kyiv. In the Middle East, Lebanese authorities say Israel has intensified its attacks across the country. Hezbollah has confirmed the death of its media relations chief in an Israeli strike on central Beirut on Sunday. Local media reports also say an Israeli airstrike targeted Hezbollah's head of operations on the southern front, but his fate remains unknown. Meanwhile, reports have emerged that there are moves to achieve a ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah, but no progress has been reported. Jonathan Regev has more in Tel Aviv.
As far as Lebanon is concerned, negotiations parallel with heavy bombardments, are the two things connected? Probably yes. There is a feeling in Israel that the ceasefire may be coming soon. Not tomorrow, not the day after, but it might be happening in the next few weeks. And therefore, many Israeli officials, the Israeli army, believe that whatever will not be achieved now in the coming days, in the coming weeks, will not eventually be achieved because the war will be stopped with some kind of an agreement. That is why we're seeing intense bombardment of especially the Dahya neighborhood in Beirut, but not only the Dahya neighborhood. This high-ranking Hezbollah official today was killed in the Lebanese area, but in another neighborhood. We're also seeing the ground offensive progressing in southern Lebanon. There is a feeling in Israel that some kind of an agreement will be reached soon, and therefore Israel has to move quickly to achieve as many of its goals as it can. There are also reports in Lebanon that Amos Hochstein, the American envoy, might be coming to the region, to Lebanon, in the coming days. Therefore, there is a parallel between these heavy bombardments and the negotiations for a ceasefire, as Israel believes that whatever will not be achieved now will not be achieved at all, and that is why it has to act fast.
That was Jonathan Regev in Tel Aviv. Finally, in Asia, Typhoon Man-Yi has swept across the Philippines' main island of Luzon, bringing heavy rains and strong winds. The powerful storm hit on Sunday, triggering more than 1 million evacuations and damaging buildings across multiple regions. It is the 6th tropical cyclone to hit the Philippines in a month. Ray Addison has more.
Islands battered by waves and wind, homes under threat, and more than 1 million people forced to flee to emergency shelters due to the deadly effects of Super Typhoon Man-Yi.
We evacuated because every time there is a typhoon, the water rises in the nearby river. We have children with us and we are scared. That is why we evacuated.
With powerful winds reaching 185 kilometers per hour and waves of 44 meters, Man-Yi, known locally as Pepito, has splintered homes, schools and businesses, uprooted trees and brought down power lines. And it's the 6th tropical cyclone to hit the Philippines in a month. In October, Tropical Storm Trami and Typhoon Kongray brought heavy flooding, triggered landslides and killed more than 160 people. The damage to communities, infrastructure and farmlands has been extensive. Although meteorologists say Man-Yi is expected to weaken slightly, they're still urging people to take precautionary measures and warn it still poses a potentially dangerous and life-threatening situation.
That was Ray Addison reporting. Now recapping the headlines, Chinese President Xi Jinping has called for enhancing China-Brazil ties as he arrived in the country for the G20 summit and a state visit. The Biden administration has reportedly allowed Ukraine to use long-range missiles supplied by the US to strike Russia. And Lebanese authorities say Israel has intensified its attacks across the country, with its media relations chief killed in an Israeli strike. And that's it for this edition of The Top Story, a podcast that brings you world headlines every weekday. For more news in politics, business, sports and culture, you can subscribe to the Beijing Hour, a 1-hour podcast news magazine program. We welcome and appreciate all ratings and reviews. I'm Qi Zhi. Thanks for listening.